Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Fourth Sequence, and I hate doing video intros. Alright, that's out of the way. So, I've been kind of off-cast for the last few days. For the most of the last week, really. I've been trying to kind of figure out some things with homing Soulmass that have been sort of dogging me a little bit since I started playing the remaster. So, a little backstory. For those of you guys that don't know me very well, and there are a lot of guys that don't know me, I'm not really a big streamer or YouTuber or anything. I'm just a guy that... I kind of came up with this build when vanilla was a big thing. And it's a build that I like using. And basically, I run around and I yell at things, and I make my Soulmass hit them. So that's sort of the central idea of the build, so to speak. Basically, it's a Dragon Form homing Soulmass combo build. So I like to throw up Soulmass and use a lot of unlock tech and kind of reverse backsteps and that kind of thing to sort of get in and sort of engineer a situation where Soulmass will hit reasonably reliably. So I've kind of carried that over from game to game. I carried it into Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 and some other stuff. And coming back to Remaster is probably the game where I have the most experience with this playstyle. And the thing about Remaster that threw me for a loop is that homing Soulmass felt very, very different in this game than in the vanilla game. I couldn't put my finger on why. We were having a lot of conversations, being other people that play sorcery builds, and it's like, you know, the shots are faster, they're slower, they curve more, they have less blind spots. I don't know. I decided the best way to figure it out would be to test it. You know, just go in, spend a few days in the lab, record footage, throw it into Vegas, and start piecing through it, come up with a few theories, and then see if I can figure out what's changed and what's stayed the same. So, basically, this is what I got. I got a big old pile of tests, and the first test that I came up with was probably the one that gave me the most solid information, which is this. I'll just let that play through in the background for a little while. But everything else I got was kind of junk. But I did come to a few conclusions. So the conclusions I came to were... Let me get my notes out. There were 4 results that I was able to confirm. The first result is that Soulmass is prioritizing its targets using different rules in Remaster versus Prepare to Die, which is something... That's probably where the majority of it, the things that were throwing me off, were coming from. Why don't we just kind of get into it? We'll go one by one. We'll start kind of going through things. All right. So basically, the idea is, all right, this is a little tricky to explain. There's sort of a lock-on priority to homing Soulmass. This is something I didn't really think about too much in the initial game, but I've been thinking about it a lot more now. So this is vanilla. And in vanilla, the lock priority is the center of the targeting cones. So basically, like, if you imagine you've got, like, these 3-dimensional collision cones hanging off of the Soulmass shots, they all kind of focus in on the center, basically on the lock point. So if you're locked onto something, that's the thing that's going to get priority. And what you're seeing me test here is I'm testing to see if in the original game, under different circumstances, the Soulmass is going to go for the slime that I'm targeting, or if it's going to go for any other slimes in the hallway. And as you can see, it's pretty much always going for the one that I'm targeting. So that's lock priority for the vanilla game. Now let's look at lock priority for Dark Souls Remastered. And this is the thing that got me interested in starting to test this to begin with. I noticed this when I was on my first run. I figured maybe I would see if I could farm some slimes for Green Titanite, and I went down, and this started happening. Very, very different result. So this kind of bugged me out. This kind of got me thinking. Well, it got me kind of asking myself a question. Is this a case of Q-Lock touching the spaghetti, so to speak, or is this effectively new spaghetti? Like, one theory that we have running is that, you know, they've got some bits and pieces maybe from Dark Souls 3 or something, and they pulled it over and put it into this game. I'm sort of the opinion now that it's basically just Q-Lock touched the spaghetti, but they touched it in a way where they used some solutions from Dark Souls, from the later games like Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, and they sort of incorporated that into this one. And you can see that here. This is actually a really interesting shot right here. So where were you? You know, I have another one clipped right over here. So in Remaster, what it's doing is it's targeting based off of what's closer. And I can't tell if that's what's closer just generally in space, just all around you, or if it's based on sort of the ground plane. I kind of feel like it's almost based on the ground plane, because at this point here, where the slime sort of crosses over where the other one would be, that's where you see the Soulmass shots start getting a little confused as to what gets more priority than the other. So, you know, this is sort of the beginning of it. Then he hits that point, and they split up. So what does this mean for sorcery players? Well, I think the actionable information, this is something that would probably be more useful for PvE players than PvP, but effectively what's happening here is, because it's based on sort of general position, and because it's going to make it a lot easier to hit things that are closer to you and higher up. Things like, you know, larger bosses and whatnot. Maybe you have a larger boss and maybe you have something smaller like in front of it. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. For PvP, I'm not really sure how this would be helpful. But it's interesting, and it got me thinking about testing the spell. So from this point, I started going through and doing a lot of like weird, you know, I ran around the game, and, you know, I was trying to see if I could peel shots off on certain enemies more easily in one game or another. I would like run around in front of enemies running in circles, trying to see if, you know, one would hold on to shots for longer. And this spell is incredibly frustrating to test anything with. This is an incredibly difficult spell to get any sort of consistent anything out of. So outside of this finding right here, everything else got a little bit hazy. There were 3 other tests that kind of did reasonably well, where I sort of managed to get some interesting information. I did a... Let me just double check here. I think the first one was a pivot test, where basically what I did, and let's go back to the game, I'll kind of show you what that is. I actually kind of ended up getting a few tests off of this. This was the initial test. As you stand here, this is probably the best enemy I have right now for testing Soulmass outside of using players. This whole arena right here, it's a very constrained space. It's a very easy space to work around. There are landmarks I can use to kind of walk towards. So the first test was, let's see what happens when I do this. What I found on this test, this is sort of like the second finding, Soulmass is actually locking on a little bit faster in Remaster than it is in Vanilla. And that bugged me out a little bit more. I really felt like up to this point that Remaster was actually locking on slower. Let me go find the tests really quickly. This was pivot tests 11 and 23. Okay. Sorry, it takes my computer a second to switch back and forth to Vegas. I really need to get some new parts in this thing. Okay, so this is a live version of that pivot test. I'll just start. By the way, I'm gonna put all this footage at the end of the video, so if anybody's interested in kind of watching through without any commentary or anything like that, you can sort of, you know, just do your own thing. Take a look, see if you find anything that I don't. But the thing I want to point out here, every single time I do this test, I lock these tests onto this point where the Soulmass starts firing. So for both games, they do something different. For Prepare to Die Edition, the Soulmass just disappears. And for Remaster, you'll see the lighting actually changes on my model. Like, this Soulmass here becomes an entity in the world, and it gets a light source different from the light source that it uses. So this is kind of what I used to find the spots where it was firing off. And Remaster, it's... Alright, I should make a disclaimer. It's not that the shot is faster, it's that it's locking on faster. So, it's actually exactly the same speed. So this is another finding right here. These shots aren't going any slower than they used to. What they're doing is that they're locking on. They're taking longer to lock on. Every single time, the dragon from Prepare to Die Edition turns first. What that means is that this version right here is taking more time to actually lock on to the enemy than Remaster. So Remaster is actually getting the lock faster. So let's go back again. Now watch this dragon right here. Watch Prepare to Die Edition dragon. He always turns first. Every time. And this is something that I noticed in some of my other tests too. Is that Remaster is always the one where the Soulmasses get out of the gate faster. See? Turn first time. So that I think is a reasonably solid conclusion. I don't think I need that big of a sample size for something like this. Discrepancy in most cases is pretty clear. So that's finding number 2. Finding number 1, Soulmass prioritizes its targets differently based on distance. Finding number 2, under certain circumstances, Remaster Soulmass actually locks on faster than vanilla. Alright, so what implications does this have for PvP? At least for a build like mine. Well, this means that these situations where I'm trying to get in, I have a much better chance of that hitting. Because the Soulmass, if I'm figuring out the conditions so that I get that quick lock, then they have a much better chance of getting in while my opponent is still roar stunned. But it's still kind of throwing me off a little bit because just everything up until now that I've been doing with the spell just has been... It feels like they're slower, and I don't understand how, or at least I didn't understand how they could feel slower, but be faster when I actually lock them down and put them to the video. So, let me turn off DSR for a second. So let's see, and go back to my notes real quick. So, let's see. I'm just looking to see if I covered anything. That's basically the major findings right now, is that it's using different rules to prioritize targets in the new game, and that there are circumstances where the new Soulmass is actually firing off faster. So everything else past that point, you know, I have a note here. Soulmasses, they're not curving like regular Soul Arrow. I don't think we really need to. Well, actually, let's just look at this for a second. Here's another test that I did. I called this a strafe run test. I didn't really get anything conclusive out of this like I was hoping. But it did at least confirm that I'm not seeing any major, like, you know, curving in the tracking. I don't know. I should double check this at long range. Maybe it curves a little bit, like at the extreme ranges. But right now, everything that I'm seeing thus far, everything that I've seen in all my tests, including this one and other things with other enemies that were long distance, indicate that this is not curving. So that's about it. They're not curving, they're not traveling any faster, they're locking on faster, and they're using different rules for priority. Those are the 4 concrete findings. From here, I sort of get into theory crafting a little bit. This is where it gets really weird. Okay. I'm trying to think of what's the best way to explain this. There's a tracking delay to Soulmass. So let's go back to the pivot test for a second. It takes a certain number of frames for the Soulmass to actually realize that they can fire at the target they're locked onto. Now Remaster's faster here. So I've come up with a sort of running theory of why it can be faster here, but why it can feel slower when I'm trying to do my shenanigans with like combos and with peeling shots off the side of the row. And my theory is that at the center of the lock-on window, Soulmass actually locks on faster than at the edges of the window. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to the strafe run tests. So imagine there are these, you know, essentially cones hanging off of the Soulmass, the firing cones. At the corners, like where he starts running, right up here in the corner, they're gonna lock on a lot slower. And when he's right about here, that's when they have the best chance of locking on in Remaster. Or at least that's my running theory. This is sort of my white whale right now. This is the thing that I'm trying to catch. I think I've reached about the limits of what I can do in terms of testing with enemies. So I think what I might have to do is I might have to arrange a player test, and we might have to be really, really just, you know, we might have to be really meticulous about things like positioning and like putting down markers. I might have to have people like stand in the edges of the window and like, you know, be moving a little bit or be stationary and like I'm moving. Here's another thing too. Let's see. This isn't the only factor that I have a theory is causing Soulmass to lock on slower. I think movement is also contributing to this lock-on lag. Let's see, pivot tests. 1123. Back here. Keep going back to these. So, I mean, this is basically what I was talking about before. You know, Remaster, it's going faster. It's locking on a hell of a lot faster. I wish I had something conclusive that I could show that would prove that it's locking on slower on the edges. Actually, hold on. I think I have an idea. Oh yeah, and I even marked it too. Okay. Here's one weird one. Let's just get this in a loop for a minute. Oh no. Damn you, Discord. Alright, I'm not even answering that one. I'll get to him when I'm done with the voiceovers. So, you see how all of these shots up here, let's open this up a little bit more. All these shots up here in the corner, they pop off pretty fast. The one over here, he was sort of outside of the window. If you imagine the window is like right about here. He wasn't there for that one. For this one, maybe he was like kind of... Maybe this is the one right here. This shot is the one where he was borderline. Like, this is the one where he was on the edge, and this was the shot right down here that he didn't register for. And then because he's moving during that shot, it's taking much longer to actually lock on. So, yeah. That's basically where I'm at right now. I have 2 more theories that I want to kind of figure out. And that's, do movement and does positioning relative to the window affect anything at all? Honestly, I probably could have tested this a lot more, but after about a week of this stuff, I really, really want to get back to PvP. So I think we're going to call it a conclusion there. It's not the most satisfying result in the world for me, but I got a couple of interesting things out of it. I got a couple of questions in my head, and I think some of the information now that I'm getting here is going to help me a little bit more with this guy right here. So anyway, I'll be including, like I said, I'm gonna roll I'm just gonna roll all the testing footage that I have that sort of compiled together. If you guys have any ideas for anything else you'd like to see me test in this manner, something like, you know, with the split screen and whatnot. I haven't really done a whole lot with this. Me and Barnezy did a little bit of stuff with this here and there back in the day, but now that Remaster's out, I think this is going to be a really handy tool for sort of just locking down some of the tiny changes in this game. So anything that you guys feel like in the game is like acting up or acting weird, or just maybe there's something you'd like to see in split screen in general, this could be really good for things like, you know, backstabs and whatnot, seeing what backstabs look like on both sides of the window. You know, just all kinds of like general netcode, just nonsense. But anyway, I hope this helped you guys out. I hope any of this was interesting at all. Thanks for hanging around and listening to me ramble. And yeah, let me know if there's anything else that would be interesting for me to test with this method, and I will consider it for future projects. All right, take care, guys. I didn't really include this footage in the commentary because the conclusions that it helped me come to, I was able to explain with the other footage, but I kept it in here just for the sake of completeness. If anybody notices anything interesting, please let me know in the comments.